Machu Picchu is a 15th century Inca citadel located in the eastern cordillera of southern Peru on a 2,430 meters mountain range. It is located in the Machu Picchu district with Urubamba province above the Skirt Valley, which is 80 kilometers northwest of Cusco. The Urubamba River flows past it, cutting through the cordillera and sustaining a canyon with a tropical mountain climate. For most speakers of English or Spanish, the first CE Pichu is silent. In English, the name is pronounced. The Incas, in contrast with the Mayans, had no written language and no European visited the site until the 19th century so far as is known. Therefore, no written records of the site while it was in use. The names of the buildings, their supposed uses, and their inhabitants are all the product of modern archaeologists on the basis of physical evidence, including tombs at the site. Most recent archaeologists believe that Machu Picchu was constructed as an estate for often referred to as the lost city of the Incas. It is the most familiar icon of Inca civilization. The Incas built the estate around 1450 but abandoned in a century later at the time of the Spanish conquest. According to the new AMS radiocarbon dating, it was occupied from 1420 century to 1532. Historical researches published in 2012 claims that the site was probably called Machu Picchu by the Inca, as it existed on the smaller peak of the same name. Machu Picchu was built in the classical Inca style, with polished dry stone walls. Its three primary structures are the Intihuatana, the Temple of the Sun, and the Room of the Three Windows. Most of the outlying buildings have been reconstructed in order to give visitors a better idea of how they originally appeared. By 1976, 30% of Machu Picchu had been restored and restoration continues. Machu Picchu was declared a Peruvian Historic Sanctuary in 1981 and a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983. In 2007, Machu Picchu was voted one of the new 7 wonders of the world in a worldwide internet poll. Etymology. In the Quechua language, Machu means old or old person, while Picchu means either portion of coque, being concert, or pyramid pointed, multi-sided solid cone. Thus, the name of the site is sometimes interpreted as Old Mountain. The site is on a narrow saddle between two mountain peaks, Machu Picchu and Machu Picchu. A study published in 2012 in Naupapacha, Journal of the Institute of Andean Studies, suggests that in the Quechua language, the abandoned Inca site was called Machu Picchu, after the smaller peak at the site, or perhaps just Picchu. Huayna means young in the Quechua language. The research documents that starting in 1911 with the published of American historian and explorer Hiram Bingham, the name Machu Picchu became associated with the range. Evidence of reference by native Quechua speakers dating to their reports to the Spanish early maps and even discussion with Bingham is cited in the new researches into historical records regarding an apparently arbitrary selection of the name Bingham associated with the site that differed from the traditional name. The name given to the abandoned settlement by its builders has not been determined by researchers. History. Machu Picchu was believed burgher profession of anthropology to have been built in the 1450 century. However, a 2021 study led by Burger used radiocarbon dating to reveal the Machu Picchu may have been occupied from around 1420 to 1530. Construction appears to date from two great Inca rulers, Pachituet Inca Yupanquio and Tupac Inca Yupanquio. There is a consensus among archaeologists that Pachituet ordered the construction of the royal estate for his use as a return, most likely after successful military campaign. Although Machu Picchu is considered to be a royal estate, it would not have been passed down in the line of succession. Rather, it was used for 80 years before being abandoned, seemingly because of the Spanish conquest in other parts of the Inca Empire. It is possible that most of its inhabitants died from smallpox introduced by travelers before the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the area. Daily life in Machu Picchu. During its use as a royal estate, it is estimated that about 750 people lived there, with most serving as support staff, who lived there permanently. Though the estate belonged to Pachituet, religious specialists and temporary specialist workers lived there as well, most likely for the ruler's well-being and enjoyment. During the harsher season, staff dropped down to around 100 servants and a few religious specialists focused on maintenance alone. Studies show that, according to their skeletal remains, most people who lived there were immigrants from diverse backgrounds. They looked the chemical markers and osteological markers they would have if they had been living their whole lives. Instead, there was bone damage from various species of water parasites indigenous to different areas of Peru. There were also varying osteological storages and varying chemical densities, suggesting varying long-term diets characteristics of specific regions that were spaced apart. These diets are composed of varying levels of meat, potatoes, grains, legumes, and fish, but the overall most recent short-term diet for these people was composed of less fish and more corn. This suggests that several of the immigrants were from more coastal areas and moved to Machu Picchu, where corn was a longer portion of food intake. Most skeletal remains found at the site had lower level of artistics and bone fractures than those found in most sites of the Inca Empire. Inca individuals who had artistics and bone fractures were typically those who performed heavy physical labor or served in the Inca military. Agricultural. Much of the farming done at Machu Picchu was done on its hundreds of man-made terraces. These terraces were a work of considerable engineering, built to ensure good drainage and soil fertility while also protecting the mountain itself from erosion and landslides. However, the terraces were not perfect, as studies of the land show that there were landslides that happens during the construction of Machu Picchu. Still visible are places where the terraces were shifted by landslides and then stabilized by the Inca as they continued to build around the area. Terraces constructed overlooking Urubamba River and many other springs provided fresh water for crop production and served more than 1,000 households. It is estimated that The area around it, the site has received more than 1080 mm of rain per year since 1450, which was more than needed to support crop growth there because of the large amount of rainfall at Machu Picchu. It was found that irrigation was not needed for the terraces. The terraces received so much rain that they were built by Incan engineers